tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hello, welcome to the Power of Zero show. I am your host, David McKnight, best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You Lerp, The Volatility Shield, and Tax-Free Income for Life. You can follow me on Twitter at McKnight&Co, at McKnight&Co. If you want to buy any of my books, single copies, head over to Amazon, wherever you buy fine books. Or if you want to buy them in bulk, and you can want to mix and match to achieve bulk orders and discounts on all of my books, you can head over to davidmcknightbooks.com. If you are looking for someone to help you navigate all of the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, head over to davidmcknight.com. We will hook you up with one of our elite POZ advisors, connect you in your neck of the woods. If you are an advisor who wants to level up your game, head over to powerofzero.com and opt into our free video series. All right, today we are going to talk about something that's been in the news of late. If you notice on Twitter and elsewhere, Roth IRAs have been trending, and that is owed in large part to the discovery that tech entrepreneur Peter Thiel, I think that's how you pronounce it, Thiel. It was discovered that he has over $5 billion in his Roth IRA. And so naturally people are wondering, how in the world did Peter Thiel accumulate $5 billion in his Roth IRA? So we're going to be talking about that today. We're also going to be contrasting Peter Thiel's approach to accumulating wealth with that of Mitt Romney. And we're going to talk about what my recommendations are for Mitt Romney, if he's interested in hearing what they are. So let's start off with Peter. He started off back in 1999. He was one of the founders of PayPal. He wanted to create this new way of facilitating commerce in a global way. And so he, along with others, founded PayPal. In 1999, the Roth IRA was in its infancy. In fact, you could only contribute $2,000 per year. I remember those days. $2,000 per year, the same as your traditional IRA. And you had strict income limits, as you do today. Peter Thiel was single, and income limits back then, I believe, were $110,000. You could not contribute to a Roth IRA as a single person if you made more than $110,000. And so naturally, people are saying, how in the world did Peter Thiel contribute to a Roth IRA if he was this tech entrepreneur? Well, it was customary back then for these startups to pay their founders small salaries and make up the rest in large grants of stock. And so back in 1999, he was making $73,000. And so he qualified to contribute to a Roth IRA. And so what he did was he was able to receive from PayPal 1.7 million shares of the company. That's 1.7 million shares. But here's the key. The key is that the valuation of the stock, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding whether these shares were valuated properly or if they were undervaluated to give these people sort of key bonuses. The valuation was 1/10 of 1 penny. So this was essentially a penny stock. So he bought a huge number of shares at 1/10 of a penny per share. And he stuck that. So essentially he got $1,700 worth of PayPal stock, and he stuck that into his Roth IRA. Okay. Then PayPal went public, and it immediately went up to, I don't know if it was immediately, but it soon went up to $50 per share. So all of a sudden he had this huge amount of wealth sitting inside his Roth IRA. And he then started to use this Roth IRA as a slush fund for all of his other investments. So starting in 2004, he got a visit from a guy named Mark Zuckerberg, who was trying to raise capital for Facebook. And so Mark Zuckerberg solicits a $500,000 contribution from Peter Thiel. And of course, Facebook starts to skyrocket. So his $500,000 investment, which was of course made within his Roth IRA, starts to skyrocket as well. And so by the end of, let's see here, by 2010, 2012, his Roth IRA was worth something on the order of like $1.7 billion. That's $1.7 billion. And right about this time, Mitt Romney was running for president. And it came out that Mitt Romney had done something similar to Peter Thiel, where he took undervaluated shares in these in deals that his venture capital firm, Bain Capital, was undertaking. And so he was able to contribute $30,000 to his retirement account. But these were, of course, in undervalued shares in these companies. And so as these began to explode, then the value of his IRA began to explode as well. In fact, it got to the point where it's worth nearly $100 million. And this, of course, came out during the 2012 campaign and really sunk Mitt Romney's ship, because there was a lot of negative press around how someone like Mitt Romney could take advantage of a system that would allow him to contribute $30,000 and then have that $30,000 get parlayed into millions and millions of dollars. Little did the press realize that at that time, Peter Thiel had something on the order of over $1.5 billion in his Roth IRA. But of course, Mitt Romney's account pales into comparison to what Peter Thiel had accumulated. So Peter Thiel eventually gets to the point in 2019 where he basically all of his investments, all of his companies that he invests in, it's all taking place under the umbrella of this Roth IRA. So he has now $5 billion spread across 96 different sub-accounts inside his Roth IRA. And presumably each of those sub-accounts reflects a different investment in a different company. The only problem with this is that Peter Thiel is a young guy, and he's not that young. I believe he's in his early 50s. He can't technically touch anything above and beyond that initial $1,700 contribution without penalty prior to age 59 and a half, without taxes and penalty, by the way. And he actually did that at, in 2010, he had to dip into his Roth IRA for $254 million, which is an unheard of thing to do. He had to do that to pay for, what did he did it for some business purpose. He dipped into it to the tune of $254 million, which is, of course, unheard of, because not only do you have to pay the tax on that, but you have to pay the 10% penalty. Guess what? If you have on the order of $1.7 billion at the time, then that's not as big a deal. Now, Peter Thiel does have investments outside of his Roth IRA. His entire net worth is not wrapped up in his Roth IRA, but a good portion of it is. And so any investment that he does where he makes contributions from his Roth IRA can all take place under the umbrella of that Roth IRA. And he's now to the point where he's telling people that he wants to live to be 120 years old. In fact, he is making investments in anti-aging technology companies. He's a fit guy. I read a book called, what was it called? It's by Tim Ferriss, where he goes and he interviews all these billionaires to see what their secrets of success are. In that book, Peter Thiel talks about how he's investing in these anti-aging companies. And so he wants to live to be 120. So to put this all into perspective for you, should his $5 billion Roth IRA continue to grow at a modest rate of 6% per year, he will be to the point where by the time he's 120, which is in the year 2087, which would be his 120th birthday, he will have $263 billion in his Roth IRA. Now let's talk about, so if we're trying to compare Romney's approach to Peter Thiel's approach, let's dissect this a little bit. A lot of people say Romney didn't really have the option of investing in a Roth IRA because he made too much money, which is true. But in I believe it was 2010, Congress eliminated, they used to have a $100,000 income threshold for those looking to convert to a Roth IRA. They got rid of that limit because with the Bush tax cuts, they were looking to gain revenue in other places. And so what they did was they enabled people that were making more than $100,000 to do Roth IRAs. And so you saw all of these hedge fund, venture capitalist titans taking their traditional IRAs that they had accumulated in much the same way that Mitt Romney had accumulated his IRA, and they were converting them. Even Warren Buffett converted a portion of his IRA to a Roth IRA. He has presumably or reportedly about $30 million in a Roth IRA, and a lot of other hedge fund managers did the same. Mitt Romney, however, did not, and he's now to the point where he has on the order of $100 million in his IRA. So the question is, if you were Mitt Romney, and I'm trying to compare and contrast these approaches, if you were Mitt Romney, why have you not done a Roth conversion yet? Because remember, Mitt Romney is in the highest marginal tax bracket, which is currently 37. Back in the day, remember that the Bush tax rates, a lot of us forget this, but he actually had tax rates that were 35%. Now, you can argue that the income thresholds were slightly different for those tax brackets, but the point is 35% is a pretty good deal. In fact, it's a good deal of historic proportions. Mitt Romney, I think, was probably foolish not to convert his IRA to a Roth IRA at that point. Why? Because even at the level of funding in his IRA, the required minimum distributions alone are going to put him in the highest marginal tax bracket. In a rising tax rate environment, he should probably have adopted the Peter Thiel approach, which is to say that he should put as much money as he can into the Roth IRA. And given that those income limits on Roth conversions have been waived, I think that Mitt Romney is foolish not to take advantage of a Roth conversion at historically low rates. He's a resident of Utah, where he's a senator. Utah state tax rate hovering around 5%. Federal tax rates are 37%. Here we have Joe Biden that's coming in to threatening to raise taxes on the wealthiest of Americans, which means that he could lose upwards of 70% of that upon distribution when he's forced to take that money out. And I believe Mitt Romney is around 70 years old, which means he could be forced to take that money out at age 72. If I were Mitt Romney, I would want to follow the Peter Thiel course of action, which is to say, he would be smart. And I don't know exactly how much is in his IRA today. Reportedly, it's around 100 million. It's being invested in a blind trust. What I would do is I would convert that entire IRA to a Roth IRA all in 1 year. He will pay federal tax, he will pay state tax, but I think that's pales into comparison to what he would pay once Joe Biden's tax reform bill comes into play through the medium of budget reconciliation. So Mitt Romney, if you try to look at his approach versus the Peter Thiel approach, and under the magnifying glass of power of principles, you would say that Mitt Romney is foolish to have that much money in his IRA. He should take advantage in the tax year 2021, because almost certainly Joe Biden's new tax reform is going to go into effect in 2022. Mitt Romney will have to pay at least the 39.6, if not more. And he will lose out on an opportunity to pay tax at that 37%. So it's never going to be better than 37% for Mitt Romney. And so not a year should go by where he doesn't take advantage of the full benefit of today's tax rate. So what do we draw from this story about Peter Thiel? What do we draw from this? What lessons can we draw from the Mitt Romney approach? One thing that we can draw from the Peter Thiel approach is just the power of the Roth IRA. Once you put those after-tax dollars in, those dollars grow in a tax-free way. And no matter what you invest them in, they continue to grow in a tax-free way. And you can draw those dollars out. You can spend them on your lifestyle, or you can keep them in and continue to make a variety of investments within that tax-free environment. Peter Thiel teaches us that once it's in there, there's no limit on the growth that you can experience in that tax-free environment. And so it's somewhat of a caricature. It's somewhat exaggerated, but the truth is he put $1,700 in there and it's now worth $5 billion. And so that is a massive return on his investment. And no matter how big it gets under current law, he's never going to have to pay taxes on that. Mitt Romney, conversely, a sizable percentage of his wealth is sitting in his IRA. The more it grows, the larger his tax bills grow. So this is really a study in contrast. It's really a study in the two different approaches that you can take. He put very little money into that IRA. It's now grown to a huge fortune, and he will have to pay taxes probably on the order of 50% by the time he takes that money out. Every year that goes by where he does not take advantage of the Roth conversion, Warren Buffett and Ted Wexler and a lot of other venture capitalist titans back in the day, they understood the wisdom of paying taxes at historically low tax rates. Remember, a lot of those guys, Warren Buffett and others, paid taxes at 35%. Okay. And now those dollars are growing in a tax-free environment and they never have to pay taxes again. Mitt Romney missed out on that approach. And now he's going to probably have to pay taxes at the 39.6. I think there's a lot to learn from each of these examples. I think that we should do everything we can to model that Peter Thiel approach, understanding that once the money is in there, we can continue to invest it. There's no ceiling on how much we make, and we can really build a fortune inside that Roth IRA. Are there other tax-free investment vehicles that we can take advantage of? Absolutely. And I propose that you take a look at all of them, whether it's a Roth 401k, Roth IRA, taking advantage of Roth conversions, LIRP, max funded in the right way and inside the right environment. LIRPs can be absolutely a wonderful complement to everything we're doing with our Roth approaches. And of course, if we can get our balance inside our IRA low enough, then RMDs can be offset by standard deductions when we're forced to take those dollars out. And finally, if we can keep our provisional income levels low enough, then our Social Security can be tax-free as well. So I'm thankful to Peter Thiel for once again putting the Roth IRA squarely in the collective conscience of Americans. Nobody had any idea that he had that much money in his Roth IRA. In fact, it took him filing for citizenship in New Zealand, of all places. By the way, he's a big J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings fan. His trust is called the Rivendell Trust. He's got a company called Palantir, which is, I think, the glowing stones from Lord of the Rings. So he's a big Lord of the Rings fan. Of course, Lord of the Rings was filmed in New Zealand. I think the real reason he's going to New Zealand is it's a great place to be should the world and civilization come to an end. I think that's a lot of billionaires are heading to New Zealand should that eventuality come path. Anyway, if you're looking for someone to help you navigate your path to the 0% tax bracket, to accumulate a huge nest egg within your Roth IRA. By the way, this doesn't happen overnight. It's takes some planning, takes some focus. But if you're looking for someone to help you get at or near the 0% tax bracket, head on over to davidmcknight.com. And if you are an advisor who wants to become an elite POZ advisor, want to be part of that group, happy to have a conversation with you, head over to powerzero.com. All right, folks, that's it for this week. We look forward to chatting with you same time next week.